Hi, I'm Lena Rao. Welcome back to our TechCrunch TV Roundtable on Sheryl Sandberg's much talked about book, Lean In. I'm joined by our awesome ladies here and Colleen Taylor, my colleague. In this segment, I want to talk about a feeling that I think Sheryl talks about throughout the book, and it's something that she says she's felt very much, and I know it's something that I feel and maybe Pooja feels as well as a new mom, is guilt. And the feeling of guilt, whether that be, by doing things at work or by making sacrifices at work at the expense of spending time with your partner or your family or your children. She writes that guilt management is as important as time management. And I think that's really an interesting point, because I'm sure we've all felt guilt at certain points in our careers. And I'd love to hear, I guess, what you thought about that and if you agree with her. Pooja, why don't you start?
Yeah, actually, I'm looking at a sentence right here in the book that really stood out for me. There is always an opportunity cost, and I don't know any woman who feels comfortable with all her decisions, and I struggle with that every day. I have an 8.5-month-old son, and every day he's learning something new, and I get text messages and little video clips from my mother-in-law who lives with us about his progress, and it's very difficult. I'm in the middle of a meeting with my team members, and I want to watch the video, but I can't take away from what's going on in the office. It's really difficult.
It's also, Pooja, you talk about it from a mother's point of view, but Sheryl also addresses the fact that we make sacrifices, even in our personal lives. If you're not a mom, you're going out to network, you're doing things on your own, like you have to have a life outside of work, and it's not all about work, but yet we feel guilty when we do spend that time away from work and we go and enjoy a nice meal or go and hang out with our friends. And I'm just wondering if anyone else feels the same way or if they've had those experiences.
Absolutely, and I think the guilt goes both ways, right? Because when you are with your family, your friends, you're having a life, there's always that nagging question of, oh, is there more I could be doing at the office? And if you're at the office and you're there late, especially in startup culture, and it becomes your life because it is your life, you start to have friends who drop off and your family starts to say you never call anymore. And so the guilt actually goes both ways. For me personally, I've never been a big believer in work-life balance. The phrase, not the concept, to be clear, which is because I believe that if you really enjoy your work and you work really hard, it becomes your life. And if you enjoy your family and you love your family, and hopefully you do, that becomes your life. And so it's more about weaving the two things together than having a clock that you clock in and out of. Especially with mobile devices, it feels like you're always on now.
That's right.
You're always on as both a friend, a sister, a parent, a partner, and you're also always on as an employee, a manager, and a boss. So I actually think it's not so much the guilt of one or the other, but sort of the, I wish I could be in many, many places at once. And in some ways, we're lucky that, with phones, we can be.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, I've definitely felt it myself. Sheryl talks about being a good daughter and a good wife and a good partner and a good mother. And, I remember when I was first starting TaskRabbit and transitioning out of IBM, where I had a lot of time to spend with my family. I remember, my parents just coming over on the weekends, as they normally did in Boston, to come visit me. And I did not have the capacity or the mental stamina to do the whole family, chill out, relax, catch up thing. I was just so wrapped up in getting this startup off the ground. And I just remember them leaving and just having a breakdown, just really upset that I felt guilty about not being a good daughter and not being able to spend that time with them. So I think the thing is you can't win, because like you said, Megan, if you're spending time with friends and family, then there's always something at work that you're thinking about too. And I think just, realizing that and embracing it and finding the best way to weave both things together, what's right for you is going to be different at different times as well.
I think it's all about setting the boundaries with yourself. So, I used to have a really hard time leaving the office until everything was done, but of course nothing was ever done. I don't think that's sustainable for multiple years. So, now I forgive myself for going to dinner and spending time with friends, knowing that I'll be back online from 11 till 2 a.m. So I still have the guilt in that I can't go to sleep if I have unanswered emails, and I get a lot of emails or between midnight and 2, and so
sometimes from us.
Yeah, sometimes. But I think that Cheryl does a much better job than I personally have in sort of, she calls it taking control of the situation. And what's really admirable on her part is not only did she set certain expectations for herself, like leaving the office at 5:30, but she was bold enough to make those public, however sort of embarrassing and scary that was, so that other people could feel comfortable doing the same thing. And I think having control over your own schedule is sort of the best way to balance sort of the guilt. And you know, I don't mind working crazy hours as long as I can decide when to take that time off and spend it with friends or family or whatever.
I think that's a really important point that she makes in throughout the book, is that you in very many ways have control over this, and if you set the standard, that's not only the way that it's going to affect your life, but it's also going to affect the lives of women around you and for generations to come. And it's funny, we have this, like going back to fear, you know, I had this fear when I was going back to work at TechCrunch that after having a baby, that, you know, the hours that I worked, there's just no way that I could do that and have a baby and be a wife, you know, and, you know, do all these things and have it all. And I remember I sat down with our TechCrunch's co-editors, Eric and Alexia, and I just like wrote out all these notes beforehand, and I was so like mentally prepared to say like, I can't do this all, you know, and for them to push back on me. But when I talked to them about it, they were completely reasonable. And I think I, in my own mind, had these insecurities, and it really, I created this for myself. And, you know, not to say that every work environment is like TechCrunch's work environment, but I do think that she made the point that you have control over your own destiny, and sometimes it is about your insecurities. And if you just are open with it and confront it, then sometimes things can actually change.
So something she talked about really inspired me today at the office. I was on a trip to New York last week and starting to feel very guilty that I wasn't spending enough time with my parents, who moved out to India for us and grandchildren. And I started to block 2 hours every morning, 7 to 9 a.m., saying, you know, I'm not going to actually work. I'm going to go on a walk with my dad. And today at lunchtime, I told my team. They asked, what did I do over the weekend? And I said, well, I've been blocking my calendar now and going out for a walk with my dad every day. And Cheryl inspired me to say that.
And what was the reaction? I'm curious.
I think it was a shock to people. They've always known me to wake up at 6 a.m., start working, you know, be on email, working hard until I go to sleep. And so I think people were taken aback, but I'm sure they could appreciate me talking so openly about the importance of family.
I wonder if, Leah, also just someone who's built a business, you know, is there anything that you think you've brought to make it easier for the people who work for you as well for that guilt?
Yeah, I mean, I think being open, like I'm sure your team really appreciated that story and thought about ways that they could, you know, work that into their own lives. And for sure, you know, at TaskRabbit, I've been open about sort of my schedule. My parents now have moved out to California to be closer to my husband and I, which is fantastic. So, you know, nights and weekends we'll do dinner with them, we'll go up to Napa with them and do weekend trips, and my team knows that. And they always ask about like, oh, how are your parents doing? How are they liking it out here? And I think it's just important to be open and transparent, to make people feel comfortable about their own work-life balances as well.
Yeah, my boss has 3 little kids, and right now she's single parenting it, and she's an amazing inspiration because, I mean, no one takes calendars into consideration when they schedule meetings, so we have a lot of 7 p.m. meetings, and she will say, no, this is one of the days when I have my kids, I'm leaving at 5, and that's that. And I remember the first couple times she did that, I was like, whoa, what are you doing? Like, how can the world go on? And it turns out that, you know, actually nothing falls apart, nothing breaks, and people are maybe even more productive with their time than when they have sort of a limitless calendar. And so she's been a really amazing inspiration for that. And then I'd have to say having a team has actually been the best thing for me, and that I have, you know, there's someone on my team who has kids, and some days he wants to pick them up from school, and I feel like I need to lead by example and sometimes having my own life so that they can feel comfortable having theirs. And hopefully I'm doing an okay job of that. But I think that Cheryl really makes people conscious of, you know, managers' responsibilities and setting that example in a way that I've never heard anyone do before.
I'm just curious, you know, if you did, my question is, you know, I like that she said that, you know, you have to sort of be in control over your schedule, but I realize the criticism is that, you know, not every boss, not every leader is going to say, oh yeah, it's fine when you leave at 5 p.m. every day to go see your kid. And we all know, I'm sure we've all been in situations where we've had bosses that are like that. And I'm just curious, you know, how you guys react to that, and do you agree with Cheryl that you have that control? And what do you do if you're not in control?
I think being in the startup world helps, in my opinion, because there is a lot of flexibility and control, and I do feel like the startup culture embraces that flexibility. You know, even when I was at IBM, actually, IBM has always been rated one of the top 100 places for women to work. And when I was thinking about leaving, I would be lying if I didn't say that didn't go through my head. You know, I mean, this is a great place for me to build a career. But I think in startups in particular, people embrace that flexibility, and I can't imagine someone not being supportive of it in this type of community.
I also think it's generational. I think that our generation has expectations that we will pass on as managers, as bosses, as CEOs and founders, that you don't have to be physically present in one geocode, one Latin long, to be able to be very capable and competent at your job and be able to perform your job. And so I think that the conversation that I've luckily never had to have, but that I would encourage someone who was in the situation you were describing to have, is how can you make sure that you're meeting all of your obligations and responsibilities and also able to take care of life's necessities. And if you can't find a position like that, if you're not fortunate enough to have a role like that, you need to think about what other options there are. Of course, this isn't applicable across the board. There are lots of people who have to punch in and punch out, so it's definitely unique to our community.
My mother-in-law is a nurse, and she's the primary caretaker of my son, actually, and she has a very strict schedule. You know, she was the one to actually have to take 3 months grand maternity leave off because I was back in the office in a week, and ever since she's been back full-time at Stanford Hospital as a nurse, you know, she doesn't get a lot of flexibility. So I understand that it's really difficult for people in jobs like that. I don't think she has alternatives.
Well, that's a good sort of segue into our next segment, because we're going to be talking about finding the right partner and how important that is in your support network, as well as mentorship. So stay tuned.